Hi, everybody. I'm Ken Vandermark, and this is the Option series that the Experimental Sound Studio in Chicago has been presenting all year since March. And later in March, it became part of their quarantine concerts, which they present almost on a daily basis. So please tune in to all the music programming they're doing, which has been absolutely monumental and very important in this particular year that we're dealing with. Our guest tonight is the most amazing Zeena Parkins. And we've got some new, is it mostly solo music, Zeena?
It's all solo.
Okay. There's some new solo performances that we'll be looking at during the course of the show. And I'm fortunate enough to get to talk to Zeena, ask some questions. If you've got questions for Zeena during the show, please put them in the chat line, and we'll try to get to those as things progress. Before I start, just really briefly, I want to mention that this show and everything that's taking place artistically, musically, is not taking place in a vacuum. It's in a cultural context that is in a massive crisis, not just in the United States, but considering the United States, I urge everyone to participate in the upcoming vote. There's a lot at stake, much more than the presidential race. Things affecting your direct communities are up for challenges that need to be met. So please participate in any way you can. And we're going to turn it over to the show now. Zeena, thanks a lot for being here tonight.
Thank you, Ken, so much.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. And you sent a really fascinating list of potential topics to go over. And if it's cool with you, I'd like to talk a little bit about one of those before we take a look at the first performance piece you've got. And I thought you brought up the idea of the history of the harp and your relationship to that history. And since that's your primary instrument, I know you work with other things, including electronics and other process-oriented stuff. If maybe you could talk about your relationship to that, your primary instrument, and that when you mentioned the history of the harp, what that means for you.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I think that, so I started as a classical pianist.
Oh, okay.
And I think it's important to understand why I play harp. And because it's not an instrument that I chose to play, although it's kind of perfect for me. I just was so lucky to be going to a Detroit public high school called Cass Technical High School, in which you would audition to get into the music department, and I went in as a pianist. And their idea was to assign an orchestral instrument to the pianist when they arrived to kind of socialize them so that they weren't in a practice room for the next 3 years. And they figured they're already good at piano, so it won't take them long to learn a new instrument. And I was assigned room 101 annex in a building. Cass at that time was in a building that was 8 stories tall in downtown Detroit with 5,000 students. So it was a large building. So I'm working my way the first day to this, obscure, out of the way back in, the windows, the stop being windows and just, crazy hallways, circuitous hallways. And I found the room and I opened the door, and in a pretty small room were 8 concert harps, pedal harps. Oh. And a woman sitting behind a desk named Velma Froud, who was going to teach me how to play harp. And so therein lies, like right there in that moment, sort of like so much was in a way sealed, and also just laid, like so much possibility all of a sudden became available to me.
So walking into that room and seeing those instruments there, that was like immediately like a dramatic connection to like what, like just excitement, yeah?
I was perplexed, yeah, to say the least.
Okay.
But once I started playing the instrument, it was clear that I just had some special connection to it. The physicality of it, I really related to the complexities of that particular physicality. And that, you have pedals and it's like sort of hug this thing, bring it into you. It just somehow the particular challenges of that instrument I really connected to and were excited by.
Was there any connection between the interior of a grand piano and then that overlap was part of it too? You felt some kind of, it wasn't like starting something that was completely foreign, or was it just so different?
On a piano you're like this, and then you bring it back to this. So that physicality. It's not so much that, yes, inside a piano there's a harp. I don't think at the time that was my connecting point.
Okay. And starting from
excited by the differences more than similarities.
Okay, I got
and
you.
Also that, I had a kind of clarity with the instrument that I didn't necessarily have with the piano. I love the piano, but I had a clarity that I didn't want to be a classical harpist. I had no idea what exactly my future would be with the instrument, but I knew very clearly I didn't want that. And at the time, there wasn't a lot of contemporary harp music. A lot of the pieces that we learned were transcriptions of piano pieces. And I was like, well, I can play these on the piano. Why would I want to play these? They're piano pieces. So there were, we learned eventually a lot of great orchestral music. But again, I was very clear even at that early moment that I didn't want to sit in the back of an orchestra waiting to play my glissandos.
Yeah, you had more in your future than that, for sure. Yeah.
So is it all to disparage that job, because it's an incredible job, and especially now the harp is so much more utilized in such a more complex way in orchestral music. But I just knew that also was not going to be where I wanted to direct my energies.
So in a sense, it kind of liberated you from constraints and certain kinds of histories, and you were able to enter it in more of your own perspective on what you wanted to do with the instrument.
Yeah, which was completely different than what it is to be a pianist, in which you are carrying the history, this incredible history of language and amazing pianists and incredible literature of all kinds from all over the world, of all genres. You're sort of like carrying that with you.
Yeah, so it's a lot of baggage, yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that, but for me, it was good to not have that and to be able to see this instrument in a different way, without that burden.
And how did you get from that high school introduction to the instrument and the shift over to it to getting it to the, it's a big jump in terms of a lot of things, but to get to New York earlier in your career and start innovating so many different kinds of things on the instrument, to building, I think it initially came out of your work with Skeleton Crew, but to build an electric harp. Those are big changes. How did those steps get you there? What steps took place?
It's so funny because it's not at all the way it would work had I been a classical pianist and went to actually, I didn't own a harp. So I had incredibly great training at Cass and had a very solid basic training on the instrument. But then I graduated, I didn't have an instrument, and I had been playing piano all was doubling. And I entered University of Michigan after taking a gap year at School of Music as a piano major, actually. And after 2 years of that, I just knew that I did not want to do that. I kind of knew that before. And then I transferred to Bard College to get a liberal arts degree with a music major. And I was still a ferocious pianist, but doing it much more on my own terms and learning more contemporary music and starting to do ensemble music and so chamber music. So expanding, and it wasn't until actually at the very end that I started thinking about, improvising. So I was still kind of holding on to my roots as a classical pianist, but it was just beginning to like spread out a little bit. And it really wasn't. And then I had probably a year or two before I moved to New York, because I was in a traveling theater group that went to Europe. And in that group, I was playing accordion. I took up accordion because I just thought I want something portable. I could swing across my back and not have to, carry something heavy or be beholden to a big instrument. And that was great, actually, learning to play accordion. Mm-hmm. And I played in this group, and I was also several characters, including a dancing bear, but and also was responsible for fundraising, and like we all did everything, and also worked sewing costumes and everything. So that took a couple years of my time. But one interesting connection happened is we were in Europe. And the drummer in the circus, so I wasn't in the circus band. I was it was a circus when I was performing in the, doing other things. But the drummer in our band was Chris Cutler.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And we became friends. And at one point we were walking, he goes, I've always wanted to do a project with a harpist. And I was like, without skipping a beat, I was like, I'm a harpist. And that was it. That was the moment where I sort of like came into, that connection all of a sudden sort of was hugely important, actually.
Wow.
That like sort of was a way to shed all this other stuff and the beginning of reinventing what the harp could be from that moment on.
Oh, wow.
So then I went back to Detroit to shed for like 8 months. Got a job in a clothing store and took lessons with this wonderful woman, Marion Bartlett, who was the Detroit Symphony Orchestra harpist. Okay. And she lived near me, and I rented a harp, a big, acoustic pedal harp, and I would take a couple lessons a week and just, practice. And then Chris, to his word, invited me to London, and we recorded the first News from Babel record. And there were two of those. That's with Dagmar Krause. And Lindsay Cooper was composing most of the music. So that it was songs. And we ended up doing two of those. But so I jumped into the studio immediately.
Wow. That's incredible.
A little bit like the harp has led me into these amazing places in this illogical way, you could say unexplainable way.
Well, it's also clear you put a lot of effort into being prepared for those situations. You know what I mean? Like you get this sort of invitation from Chris Cutler, and you're like, I'm going to do that. I'm going to do it. And then you go and you work your ass off for 8 months.
Yeah.
Practice, I mean, so it's like, these things opened up, but you were prepared to dive in there with your own work. I want to pick up this thread of history because it's super fascinating. And when you got to New York, but maybe we could listen to this first piece you've got. Yeah. And we can take a listen to some of your music now. Is there anything you want to describe about the piece before we hear it, or?
Yes, all the pieces we're going to do 4 clips that I'm working on with Jeff Price, who's a filmmaker, and we've been recording these at our home in New York, and we started them in April, and it's going to be a year-long project. Each season, it was sort of, I was back from teaching from Mills and teaching online, so all of a sudden I was home, and all of a sudden, it was lockdown, and I've actually always wanted to do a project with Jeff, and never was quite sure how to incorporate shooting me or how it should be, but this most simplest solution kind of appeared, and so we've been shooting since April, and then we took a pause for September. We're going to shoot all fall, so it will be a year project of shooting a couple times a week, and it's been really interesting to I mean, it's awful to only play solo, but it's also been really interesting to focus on instrument in this way. So
Yeah.
there are four clips that we'll see. The first one's quite short, a short one.
Okay. And this first clip, when was this shot?
These were, I think it's like June, August. I think.
Okay, so summertime.
August. So they're all from the summer.
Okay, great. Everyone, I'm talking with Zeena Parkins, our guest tonight on the final option show of 2020. We hope to be back in March of 2021. It's amazing to be here talking with Zeena. If you've got questions for Zeena about her work, please put them in the chat line on the Twitch page, and we're going to go over and listen to and see a solo performance now. And if you can, please donate. All the money will be going to Zeena during this period where regular concerts are impossible for musicians. So thank you so much. Thanks, Zeena. I'm looking forward to this piece. Okay. All right. We've been, that was the first piece of 4. Thank you, Zeena. It's great to see you play. I'm like so starved to see music that every time I get a chance to see someone, it's just like, that's what it is.
I know.
I want to pick up on what we were talking about just before we went to that piece, following your history, and there actually was a question that came in that connects with the next part, if I'm following the timeline, the chronology right, and it would fit into what we're talking about. It's from Al Iatori. In one paragraph or fewer, can you talk about the downtown New York city scene, how you think about it now versus when you first arrived?
Well, why don't I just continue with this little story, and I think some of that will be answered within this little history, just to finish the trajectory. So there was, before, after I did the first record with Chris Cutler and Lindsay Cooper, I came back and I moved to New York pretty much in a more permanent way. So mid 80s or so. And then there was another record that we did. So it was a little bit back and forth. But basically, when I landed in New York, like 84, 85, it was an incredibly, the activity that I participated in was centered in the East Village and the Lower East Side of Manhattan. And it was an incredibly dynamic, creative moment in a lot of the arts, and particularly with music. And I was incredibly fortunate to be kind of scooped up, if you could say, by several amazing artists, including Fred Frith and Tom Cora invited me to be in Skeleton Crew. That was a duo, and it became a trio when I joined the band. And that kicked off a whole new life of being a touring musician, which was completely new for me. And Butch Morris invited me to participate in some pretty early conduction ensembles. And I ended up working with him for the next 10 years in all over, in Europe, in various parts of the States, and in New York. I did a project with Pauline Oliveros because I was playing accordion, and she invited me, she had been commissioned by the Brooklyn Philharmonic to write a piece with accordions, and she did an accordion ensemble with the orchestra, and she had me play bass accordion, which I didn't know how to play, but she gave me a bass accordion, and I learned it like a fairly simple part for that project. And I also connected with John Zorn. He invited me in some of the early game pieces, and eventually to become part of one of the early Cobra groups that ended up touring the States, doing a bunch of gigs in Europe, and doing a recording as well, one of the early recordings of Cobra. So then eventually I hooked up with Ikawe Mori, and we started our group Phantom Orchard, which lasted for quite a few years. But then it was also, besides these alliances, I also had a group with Chris Cochran called No Safety, which is actually we just were made aware of a recording from Italy from '94 that was so startling. None of us really remembered it. It was near the end of the life of the band, and we decided to put it on Bandcamp. So we've been preparing for the release of that. So a lot of just an incredible amount of activity between the start of the Knitting Factory and then Tonic, and a kind of vibrancy where I was out every night either listening to friends play or playing myself. So it was, it's hard, and also New York at that time was, like, for instance, the street I lived on Ludlow in the Lower East Side. And when I first moved there, Ludlow was dark at night. And it was, you can't even imagine now the kind of darkness, the drugs, it was such a completely different world than it is now. So, and it was affordable, at least somewhat affordable.
Can you tell me, just out of curiosity, with rents becoming in a lot of major cities, but certainly in New York City and now Brooklyn and the other boroughs, things getting more expensive, it's harder for venues that present more experimental types of music, improvised music, to maintain viability economically. Where were you playing? Like some of the places, I know you mentioned Knitting Factory, but there must have been, if you were going to check out so much music and play in so many contexts, were there some other places that are less well known?
Dorinka, which doesn't exist anymore, it was in a basement. There was Context. There was the Garage. There was A Micah Bunker, which is a place that I helped curate on East 9th Street with a collective of people that went on, was a Sunday night. A tiny little basement space, but quite vibrant as well, like continued for several years. So there were just often, the tiniest places with very few audience. Sometimes people would do house concerts, but it was always morphing from one thing to another. There was the Cooler, which was in the meatpacking district. And things would appear and then disappear, and then, it was sparkling, you could say, activity.
And looking at your work now, trying to go through like the activity you've done most recently, you maintain an amazing schedule, international schedule, in addition to teaching. And I was wondering how you under more, let's say standard circumstances, 2020 aside from just the issue of working as a musician, teaching as a professor at Mills University in California. I mean, when under more normal circumstances, I mean, you're doing big projects, at least 2 of them or more, internationally every month of the year, basically, plus teaching. Like, how are you organizing that and coordinating all those projects?
Well, actually, not that many. I allow myself, when during the months I'm teaching, and I teach only in the winter spring term, so I only teach 1 semester out of 2 a year. So I'm free in the fall and then teaching in the winter spring. And when in the time, so I'm sort of working full time as a working musician in the fall and the summer. And in the winter spring, I allow myself a certain amount of touring to Europe, like 1 or 2 trips to Europe, or a couple of trips outside of California. But I try at this point not to do too many of those. So you're multitasking, basically. Mm-hmm. You're like just figuring out which projects work with the teaching schedule, and the ones that do you can fit in, and the ones that don't, if it's possible to put them at another time during the year. I'm lucky because I'm only doing 1 semester a year, so I've got this other chunk of time that I can devote to more time consuming, like a residency or a more in-depth rehearsal period with a choreographer.
Mm-hmm. Looking as an outsider to your activity, if you talk about all the stuff that was happening in the mid 80s going into the 90s in the New York City area, you were doing a ton of work with a ton of different people, and now you're maintaining that. Maybe you're in certain parts of the year, you're doing a few less projects, but you're collaborating with all kinds of people, doing, residencies, different kinds of performances, residencies at the Stone back in New York City, and in Brooklyn. So to me, looking at it, it seems that it's almost an imperative to be out there performing, be out there testing out the music, composing, working and collaborating in all different kinds of contexts. It really seems like an amazing drive to be out there in it. Is that true? Is that like part of your nature, or?
Well, the drive part is part of my nature. That's no question about that. But I actually don't feel like I do nearly as much touring as I used to, not counting 2020, which is something else. But I feel that the touring that I did in the 90s and the early aughts was much more ferocious and full on than what I'm doing now. Mm-hmm. And partly having the teaching position means that I can be a little bit more selective, and I don't have to say yes to everything, and I don't have to do all that kind of touring in the way that I did. So in fact, I'm not really doing as much. And sometimes I really do miss that, like that exact thing that you described, like that ability to test the stuff as it's emerging and work it in front of an audience. But that actually is not so much the case like it used to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's to find a balance. I still haven't figured it out. I think I'm still, 2020 aside, in a period of where I'm on the road half a year, and it's like a creative choice, but also fundamentally economic too. Like, that's the way I have to be on the road to make it. If I stayed in Chicago, I wouldn't be able to make a living, as a musician, doing the music I want to do, for sure. And I don't think anyone would hire me to do music I didn't want to do based on my skill set.
I have a question for you then. Given that economic imperative of having to be on the road, where do you find or make time for composing?
I've gotten to the point where I can write anywhere.
Okay.
So it's like, if the thing that I need, or the thing that works best, is a deadline. So it's like if it's got to get done, I'll figure out, like I'll transcribe music in the backstage before a gig, or I'm in a hotel room being quiet, trying to, I get it. I mean, it works for me. I don't need to have a specific space to get access to that kind of activity. And I definitely, I mean, it's this balance issue, not to talk too much about my own stuff, but it's an interesting dynamic issue for the work, because I really thrive on, okay, I'm writing something in the hotel room and then testing it out, and testing things out and trying it. Like, that's why I love improvised music so much. You can try again, you can, whatever. But the drawbacks are, you're in this process thing all the time, and having a chance to stand back and kind of consider things and rethink them is harder to do. Mm. And so when I look at, like your resume over the last, couple of years or whatever, these projects and these residencies, like, they're significant collaborations. Mm. So there's like, you have to have, I'm guessing, to execute them at the level that you do, you've got to have the time. You've got to have the time for rehearsals. You've got to have the time for the compositional part, getting the material together, conceptualizing things. So do you feel that the dynamic you have right now, with its ups and downs and everything else, under normal circumstances, between the teaching and the creative work you can do outside of the classroom, because teaching, I know, is very important for you too, do you feel the balance is pretty good?
Yeah, I feel the balance is pretty good. I mean, I always believe that 24 hours is not enough in a day for me. And I'm always ending the day wishing I had more time. Like, I did things I didn't do that I felt like I need to do that don't get done. But given that it's sort of like a permanent feeling, yeah, I feel that, like, the skill of learning how to use the time that I have in the most full way to get the most out of it. I've learned how to do that. Mm-hmm. Out of necessity, I've learned how to do that. And out of desire, I've learned how to do that.
Yeah. That's the thing. I mean, necessity, it teaches you. I mean, you have to adapt, And this year is a lesson in that, Mm-hmm. You just keep it to creative work, and not all the other things and all the layers and everything going on, just about music, so to speak. It's been a lesson in adapting and figuring out how to do, like you said, the solo work, and working on these pieces, and filming them over the course of the year. So let's get to the second piece. Yeah. Because I'm so into talking to you but I know that people also would like to see some music too. And before we go to it, I just wanted to see if you could answer one question from someone who's tuned in, and then we'll go to the second piece. This is from Metal Durf. Zeena, your collaborative effort on The Adorable is phenomenal and had a lasting impact on me personally. Can you explain the process you use to project such a beautiful energy?
That will get us into a whole world of making music for dance.
Okay.
Which maybe what we should do is listen to this next clip, and then we can talk a little bit about that.
Perfect. Let's do that. Everyone, I'm talking to Zeena Parkins. This is the Option Program and Experimental Studios Quarantine Concerts. Please donate if you can. All the funds are going to Zeena, as they do on all the quarantine concerts. Not that all the quarantine concert money goes to Zeena, but it does. They do go to the musicians involved in the performances. And thanks so much, Zeena. This is the second piece you've got for us. Anything you'd want to say before we hit it?
No. Enjoy.
Okay. Yeah. Enjoy. Okay. Thanks so much. Wow. It's so amazing to, there's a temptation to see the videos when they get sent over from the performers, but I always like to watch them in real time. And I know why I do that now. That was super great. Before that piece, we left off in a part of the conversation that was getting directed towards your collaboration with dancers and people who use movement, and thought maybe you mentioned this would be a good time to maybe dig into that aspect of your career.
Yeah. So I've been working with choreographers in dance since I moved to New York. And one of the earliest projects I did, which was in a way helped me connect to some of the dancers that I ended up working with for the, like since the 80s, a lot of them, was a piece called Darts by Zorn. It was a game piece for dancers and musicians. And we did it in the MoMA Sculpture Garden. So, I mean, really an iconically amazing, beautiful space. Mm-hmm. But I met some of the dancers that were living in Lower East Side, East Village, then often associated with PS 122. And, but eventually I was working a lot with Jennifer Munson and in the early days. And then it kind of from there blossomed to work with quite a few choreographers. But the relationship with Jennifer is very special. We both started not as composer and choreographer, but we were improvising together. In fact, we still improvise together. But I would say that my understanding of how to be a composer and the relationship of composition to improvisation was really worked and formed in my work with dance.
Wow.
Okay. So it gave me a space to be doing something that I didn't really know how to do yet, and work it and work it and work it and be in it and perform and, get that feedback you get from performing, like putting yourself in that performance space. But so all that to say that it's like my connection to dance is quite profound as someone and then, eventually I was making music for dance. And the interesting thing about my music for dance is that it's not the same as other work that I do. And somehow I give myself permission to do things I wouldn't normally do. Like some of my work is much more tuneful or melodic, or I also work with space in a completely different way, often using, it's from how people are spatializing now, it's still rather primitive, but I use multiple speakers to create different kind of instruments from speakers, like thinking of them as instruments. And I became very fascinated with, in the context of making music and sound for moving bodies, how sound moves through bodies and through spaces. So that became somewhat of an obsession, which continued to this day. So all that to say that in the early 90s, I was recommended to do music for a wonderful choreographer named Neil Greenberg. And he had never used music before any of his dance pieces. They had always been in silence. Wow. And so the first piece I made with him, there was maybe less than 3 minutes worth of sound in the whole piece. And then eventually, after many years, we did a piece called Really Queer Dance with Harps, in which we had 3 concert harps in the middle of the stage with the dancers dancing through and around them. So somehow his sense of how to use music evolved from this, from not having music at all to all of a sudden it sort of being the centerpiece, the instruments and everything being the centerpiece of his work. And it's been, again, a really, just a collaborative, creative relationship where I've changed as a composer as a result of working with him. So the Adorables were born from a piece that I had been commissioned to write for Neil. And it was with two great musicians, Shane Dunkelman on percussion and Precious Moments on electronics. And we were performing live. And I just loved the music so much that I wanted to make it a band. So ended up kind of altering the music a bit, doing some performances and recording it. And it came out on, it was on Jeff Gautier's label, Cryptogramophone. And it turned out to only be a one record band, but it's music unlike anything else I've made. So I can see why that would touch somebody.
You mentioned earlier when you're talking about writing for choreography and dancers, how it allowed you or gave you some sort of permission to work in a different kind of compositional style, aesthetically, and maybe in the way you organize the music itself. Why do you think that is?
Well, because it's a collaboration. Because other things are needed. It's not just me and my mashing, like whatever my current obsessions are or my problems that I'm trying to solve compositionally. I'm responding to the needs and of making a piece with somebody else. I'm not all on my own. So,
okay, so you're not composing something and then bringing it. You're really working in tandem. Okay.
Not. No, the people that I work with were really making it together. It's never been the case that they finish it and then I come in with my folder.
Can you talk a little bit about that process? Can you talk about the process? I mean, of this, like if you're starting maybe with some ideas, but obviously you're really meeting at the beginning of the whole process. How do you generate a piece together?
Well,
to make a sort of a generalization.
The choreographer is coming to me with a specific idea, and then we figure out together how that idea will be sonified. Like how it's what iteration it will have in music, or
okay.
And also sometimes the piece has particular needs, like cues, or or feelings, or spatial considerations, or theatrical considerations. So all of that then becomes material for making a composition, and it's completely specific to the needs and the considerations of the piece.
And based on, if I understand you correctly, the choreographer might come in with an idea, but they're developing that idea in tandem with you. Like it's a feedback loop of like ideas going back and forth.
Developing it with their dancers as well.
Right. Okay. So are you?
I'm the lighting designer.
Right.
Whatever the creative team is.
Okay. So and are you? Just out of from the music standpoint, are you in that room together with all the people, creative collaborators? Are you, how are you bringing the music into it? Like if you're hearing about the idea, do you have some themes or structural ideas you think when you hear the idea from the choreographer, oh, these might work in this context?
Yeah.
Or how do you present that stuff?
Yeah, that's a good question. So it happens differently for each piece.
Okay.
And also if I'm coming into a project at the beginning and I hear the story of the piece, and the ideas from the choreographer, I generally immediately get ideas about orchestration or about sounds. And I really try to take an opportunity these pieces as an opportunity to try something that I haven't tried before, either using instruments in a different way, orchestration that I haven't worked with, sound manipulation in a new way. So I challenge myself to do something that I haven't done before in response to the needs and the whatever this world of the piece that's beginning to form.
Mm-hmm.
So then what happens is we we make a rehearsal schedule. So the choreographer will generally work with the dancers before I come in, but we've already met and I'm already working and stuff. Sometimes I'll send things for them to try, but then then we have these moments where we're all together and I will bring in what I've been working on and try different things and then have a kind of flexibility with my materials that they can go in various directions or be tossed out or something emerges in a rehearsal that is unexpected that gets developed. So it's quite organic, in fact. And I should say that in general, the process of making a dance piece, like the time it takes to make a dance piece, is so different. And the rehearsal process is so vastly different than how you think about, oh, I'm going to rehearse with my band for a few days if I'm lucky, and then go play a gig or go make a record, or it's there is generally time built in to really understand this new thing that you're making and to allow space to have different opinions, because that takes, you need space, time for that, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, as a reference, because I looked at, and I apologize in advance if I pronounce this wrong, but there was this amazing section of footage, performance footage, for the Stichiomythia.
Oh yes, Stichiomythia. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, I never pronounce anything right, so that's like literally the first time. And I wonder if because people can go to your website and take a look at this piece if they haven't seen it already. If you could talk a little bit using that as a reference, because this has like an incredible set.
Yeah, that's incredible
aspects. You're there performing the music. I mean, there's so many of the components you're talking about. Can you talk a little bit of how you got to that performance? The process.
So that's completely different because there is no choreographer there. That was a collaboration between myself and a set designer from France named Nadia Loro. And we met working on another project of a choreographer's, her doing set design, me doing music, for a project by Jennifer Lacey called Money Shot, which we did in like 2000 or something. And we did it. It turned out to be an extremely popular piece, and we did it all over Europe. And we did it at the Kitchen. We did all, not that many places in the States, but we performed it everywhere in Europe. And it was exciting. And Jennifer Lacey had just moved to Paris, so this was like her entry to Europe, this piece. And it was I did the music, Nadia did the sets. Jennifer Lacey, it was her concept and choreography, and Aaron Cornell there were two dancers, Jennifer Lacey and Aaron Cornell. And my music was live, and it involved a lot of Foley sounds and a tambura, like in electronics, no harps and no keyboard. It was just completely different sound palette, oscillators and in a quad setting. But so I met Nadia there, and we always wanted to do something together. Like, we instantly felt a connection. So it took like 20 years, basically. We decided finally to do a project. Now, I'll have to just backtrack a bit, because what we decided to do is each take a project that we had been working on already and combine those projects to make something new. So her project that she had been working on in different iterations was making these anamorphic carpets. So what you see in the video looks like a three-dimensional construction, but actually it's a flat piece of carpet, and it's designed in such a way, and you're looking at it from a point of view and lit in such a way that it looks like it's rolling hills in three-dimensional, right?
It's incredible.
Yeah.
There's no way I would have known it.
Yeah, and so she had been making those for various choreographers, different versions of those. So she had been working on this idea of this kind of response to architecture and topography. And I have been working on since 2008, working with the idea of making scores from lace. So Lace Project, my Lace Project. And my project began when I was commissioned by the Merce Cunningham Dance Studio to, they invited me with 3 other composers, George Lewis, Fast Forward, and John King, to an afternoon, to come in the afternoon, rehearse for 4 hours, and then each bring in a piece and then perform those pieces in the evening. And confronted with that task, and to make a long story short, I had, normally my pieces were my composed pieces were incredibly difficult, but I realized in this particular situation with like an hour to rehearse, I would have to come up with something very different. So my idea was I basically decided I have a collection of fabrics and lace, and I picked 5 kind of graphic pieces, very different in texture and density and shapes, and sort of just pasted them onto a blackboard. And I gave a set of conditions on how to read those pieces, and that was my piece. That was, and ended up being movement 1 of this project. And I had, I wanted to give as little musical information, just give a setting of like what this was about, what the idea was, but other than that, not give a lot of details. One of the pieces did have a pitch set, but other than that, I not a lot of musical information. There were other ways to think about how to read the pieces, but they were different enough that in a way it was quite obvious, like what you could do as an improviser with those kinds of materials. So that went really well, and after all, it was such a great group. And eventually there is a movement 2, which was completely different, a movement 3, which I made a band to called Green Dome with Ryan Ross Smith and Ryan Sawyer to perform the Shetland lace knitting patterns that became pieces, called a record called Thinking in Stitches, which I put out on my label. And then this 4th movement, Stitchamithia, appeared. And so we used my idea for picking lace pieces as scores and her idea of the anamorphic carpet, and we blended those 2. So her images, so we went to a fabric store here in New York together, and I picked the pieces that I envisioned would be music compositions, and she took those and she worked with them and made a design for this carpet. That was the set, basically, right?
Right.
And then we invited 3 dancers to respond in this we didn't choreograph them, but it was a way we gave them conditions in which to be in that environment. And then I made a solo based on those pieces. So they were like,
wow. I mean, the result is amazing.
Oh.
I really, the fact that the movement was so improvised within the parameters you're talking about. I mean, the combination of all those elements feels so like you guys worked it. And I'm sure you did work on it, but it feels.
We didn't as much as we wanted to, but I will say, I think because Nadia and I were coming together with something that we had already worked out on our own, like in various formations, that we were already coming with a lot of history of these materials.
Okay.
So
it's a really strong. I encourage everyone listening and to this program to check it out on Zeena's website, just ZeenaParkins.com, right?
Yeah.
It's listed in the events, and it's just amazing. It's really beautiful. Let's hear some more music, because unfortunately we're running out of time, and I know it's late in New York, and I don't want you to miss your you're very busy. We know that. So, and I'll come back. I got another couple questions from some listeners. Anything about this 3rd piece you want to mention?
No, these are all, again, like from a set that these are all brand new. No one's ever seen them. It's
Okay. And are they all improvised pieces, or are they based on some?
Improvised.
Okay, beautiful, beautiful. Everybody, we're listening to and talking with Zeena Parkins. Thanks for tuning in. Please donate if you can. This is the Option Series at Experimental Sound Studio, and thanks for being here. These pieces are so, are so inspiring. It's like now I just want to go and practice. It's so exciting. I don't work. I just work with acoustic instruments, playing. And it's so fantastic to see people who work using electronics, pedals, other things, and have such control of the tools. Like they're purely the instrument. They're not like stapled on. And the way it's really inspiring, Zeena. Thank you
so much.
Just, wow. Okay, we have a couple questions. Again, there's so much I would love to keep talking to you about, and I want to get to this last piece before people have to go to bed. And so I usually like to close with a music piece,
Great.
so we'll go out with that. I have a quick question, then we'll go to these other questions. With the electric harp that you designed with other people helping you and you built, and is so clearly like an unbelievable instrument, how do you deal, compared to the conventional, conventional harp, with the difference in register range? Like, because it doesn't, I mean, not for even a millisecond you feel like, oh, you're losing something, but with a more compressed set of range, how is it possible to do what you're doing? I mean, obviously worked on it a ton, but do you feel that differential, or is it just a different kind of instrument for you, or what?
I mean, all of the above. Like every instrument has its boundaries or its limitations, and how we are with those limitations, like how we navigate those, is what binds us to our instruments in a way. And our connection is about, you could say, is partially about that. But so with the electric harp, it's very clearly much more, the tuning is fixed. It doesn't have levers, it doesn't have pedals to change the pitches. And so what I tune in at the beginning of a session are the pitches that are tuned in. That's what it's going to be. That said, I can use electronics in the moment to change octaves, or to I can do various kinds of expansion of that range that I have, both in register, like adding octaves below and above, and also have increments of pitches above and below each particular string, with the live electronics. And with the electric harp, I've always kept the rule of the electric harp is no computer processing. It's only old school pedals. So I have 3 outputs on the electric harp. Actually, practically, I only use 2, and each output has its own series of pedals, which vary depending on the project, and that all feeds into a mixer and goes out mono. So it's just a mono out to an amp. And so what I call those pedals instruments, in a way they are, but how my instrument is extended by those pedals give me density, give me range, give me tone color. That's really how I'm shaping the sound. Like it's a feedback machine between the pedals and my body and the instrument.
It's so organic. I mean, it's just so directly connected. It's really awe-inspiring, I have to say. And it makes me think for a minute, if I've got the history right, that you started working and developed the electric harp to play with Skeleton Crew.
Yeah, I mean, they wanted me to play harp, and it was, I mean, as with so many things that I've done, it was purely a practical decision. It wasn't an art decision. It was like, I needed an instrument I could carry onto the airplane because we were touring, and that I would always have a harp. And in the old days, that first harp, I was playing a Korg CS3 organ, and the very first harp I had, we had a clamp, and the harp came up perpendicular from the organ, I had the keyboard, and it would just come up on the edge. So I could just get right to it, but it was just, that was the reason to have the instrument. So, and the other really important reason is, as I was playing a different kind of music than the harp was normally associated with, and often that meant playing with drums, playing with electric guitars, playing loud trombone players, whatever, like loud instruments, I would often find myself not only being the only woman in the room, being the person with the softest instrument in the room. And that was not a good idea. That formula was not a good idea. And and after experimenting with, at the time, all kinds of ways to amplify the harp without completely diminishing the gorgeous sound of the instrument, I decided that I really needed an electric instrument. And in those days, you couldn't buy an electric harp like you can now. So it had to happen. That's all I can say. It needed to happen, and it had to happen, and I had it, and I just jumped in and used it right away. And then it was the beautiful thing of refining the instrument, making it better, and understanding what it is to make an instrument from scratch, and the ergonomics of it, and making space for your hands, and adding a whammy bar, and like having multiple outputs, like all the things you can do to invent something,
I think it's so amazing, like just the idea, it's like, it wasn't about art, it was about practicality. And then the solving the problem, the essential problems of like being, competing volume wise, being able to travel with it more easily, leads to this unbelievable series of innovations and better understanding of how the instrument can be improved. It's like when I talked to Igwe Mori and asked, like, why did she start the drum machines, which is like unbelievably many things she's done, which are incredibly innovative. The use of drum machines, the way she did it.
No,
I was carrying the drums. Yeah. I didn't want to lay the drums up my flights of stairs. Yeah. And it's like so direct, but it's like it totally changed what she did artistically and led to such amazing things. So that combination of practical use in the field leading to new ideas, that dynamic in art, I whatever kind of art, music and otherwise, is so exciting to me.
And you could say then, it's no surprise, it's funny that you bring up her, because our sensibilities are so meshed and complementary.
Absolutely. So absolutely.
Like
no question about that.
Like the reasons for doing things,
Yeah. I can see that 1,000%. All right, I have a couple real quick questions, and then we'll go to this last piece. From J. Montes 807. How did Zeena connect with Bjork, and how was it touring with her?
Bjork, that's a whole chapter, but I will say that she wrote me an email and asked if I'd be, and just wrote me directly, not her manager or anything, and just, it was so sweet. She was like, you might not know me, but I write songs, and would you be interested in playing harp on some of my songs? And what could one say? It was just so great. We met, and then I auditioned for her, and she's just such a brilliant person. She had me for audition. She gave me a CD to learn by ear, a piece by ear, and then she gave me some sheet music to learn a written thing. So she just, just getting the scope of what I could do. Mm-hmm. And then when I brought my harp to play with her, and then we played, of course she could see that I could read and play by ear and improvise, and that, that was that. Yeah. So that's how I got to play with her. And I ended up writing songs with her and making my own arrangements of many of my own arrangements for on Vespertine. And it was just, I learned a lot from working with Bjork.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So it was a really positive experience.
Like 4 years with her. So she's just a brilliant, a beautiful improviser, an incredible instrument, an incredibly deep human being. Yeah.
Wow. No, I didn't know about the improvising aspect. No question of the stuff I've heard is amazing instrument, as you said, but the improvising, that must have been exciting to work with someone.
Well, it's a different kind way of thinking about improvising, but you know, she can come up with something on the spur of the moment, and she listens.
Mm-hmm. Those are two very important parts of being an improviser. Okay, one more question, and then we'll move it to the last piece of music. This is from Kitano's Fur, I guess. Curious about the early New York City collaborations. Which ones seem now to have most changed your sense of yourself as a musician?
Yeah, I mean, I would have to say there's not a single person. I mean, I just was so fortunate to work with Butch Morris, Fred Frith, John Zorn, Tom Cora, Iko Mori, Pauline Oliveras, you know, like Chris Cochran, you know, to start with.
Right. So, and all those contacts and those collaborations, and a lot of those people you're still working with, right?
Oh,
those
yeah.
are like, yeah, I mean, that's a beautiful thing.
Lifetime friendships and connections.
Yeah. I mean, those are deep collaborations when you have that connection initially, and then it builds over years. That's priceless. Those are the most amazing ones. Zeena, I want to thank you so much for the performances you've brought to the show tonight. Amazing history, so inspiring, and to get a chance to talk to you like this is a real privilege. So I want to really thank you. We couldn't have a better way to conclude the 2020 series of Option. We're going to be back next year, no matter what. I want to thank Experimental Sound Studio for all they're doing, not just for Option, but for the quarantine concerts and all the other programming they're doing. They're an extraordinary institution based in Chicago, but international impact. I want to also thank the co-curators, Tim Daisy and Andrew Klinkman, for all their help. Ralph tonight for the tech support. Everyone who's been tuning in and listening, please support musicians in this period. There's a lot of insanity going on, a lot of chaos.
Please vote.
Yes. Thank you very much for reiterating that. That's essential. Music helps me get through it, but we've got to be practical about some of these solutions. And one of those things, practically speaking, is go vote. And let's get this thing sorted out. Zeena, thank you. And this last piece of music, another improvisation, any
same series. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Good luck. Have a beautiful autumn. Yeah. And I hope to see you soon in person.
Take care.
Thank you, Zeena. Thank you. Bye-bye.